David Bosch, the South African missiologist, which I think a lot of people point to as being a very significant voice, certainly, was a great read for me and really, really gave me language for what I was struggling with. And then I think particularly Newbigin, who was a missionary, of course, in India for many, many years, returned to the UK, where he came from, and began to realize that actually that the United Kingdom and hence the Western context itself was in need to be re-evangelized, and that it itself, even though I used the kind of imagery of a stone that had been immersed in water for centuries, and then but you pick up the stone and you break it open and it's still dry on the inside, and you would say that effectively European culture had resisted the gospel, and that it needed to be thoroughly re-evangelized, and that made a lot of sense to me. And is a wonderfully articulate man. So I think, he would be the one I'd look to. For me, I think the big insights were, particularly from Bosch, the idea that mission is not just a subset of ecclesiology, as in the doctrine of the church. It's not something which only the church does, but of theology proper, that is, it's who God is. That the Missio Dei, of course, is the idea that God is himself a missionary, and this in Trinitarian terms as well. And then for me, the other thing that's very important as a practitioner more than a theologian, that mission is an organizing principle of the church. Prior to this, it might have been worship services or community, which are all very important, but as organizing principles, I believe that if you organize around mission, you get the other ones thrown in, because you become a community that we were intended to be by actually pursuing the mission that only the church can fulfill. We're a certain people that only we can fulfill. We're apostolic in the historic sense of the word. Then, of course, Guder I would throw in too. Guder's been amazing.
Yeah, and a difference, though, between Guder and, so Bosch and Newbigin, Bosch writes Transforming Mission, for those who are listening to the conversation, which is the Summa Missiologica. It is resource that shapes so much of missiological conversation. So we answer the questions a little differently. Alan answered the question about the understanding of mission, and I answered the question about introducing the idea to evangelicalism. So all of what Alan described, like organizing the congregation around mission, was actually present in the World Council of Churches missionary structures of the congregation project that kind of flowed out of Willingen in the early 50s. So again, history doesn't repeat itself, it tends to rhyme. So these ideas have been around for decades. I think they're rooted in the biblical text. But these ideas have been around for decades. But for evangelicals, just for a handful of decades. For us mainline Protestants, longer. So some people who are concerned about the missional church conversation, their concern is often built around the fact, well, it didn't work out so well for, when I talked to Darrell Guder, I don't know, I wrote this in a book somewhere. I talked to Darrell Guder, and he would say, I mean, part of what he wanted to do was to recast the mission and use the word missional, because mainline Protestants, conciliar people tended not to use the word missional. They use the word missio Dei, sometimes missional. But what Guder wanted to do is not make the mistakes of conciliar. Remember, conciliar means mainline Protestant, council of churches. He wanted to help people not make the mistakes, to get the emphasis on mission. I asked Francis Dubose before he died that same question. He said, well, I wanted to take the best of the conciliar missions understanding of the Missio Dei, use the word missional. He actually used the word missional to cast it in a different way, to sound different, so that, and if he was an evangelical, so that evangelicals could learn the truths without making the mistakes of the conciliar missions movement, which is something that Alan and I are both very passionate about, because this didn't end well in contexts that embrace this without having a fully orbed focus on sharing the gospel, evangelism, a clarity on the cross, and more.
So let's talk
interestingly on that, if I may,
sure, go ahead.
Yeah, we're jumping in now.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Darrell Guder, such a wonderful guy too, by the way. I think he's Newbigin's inheritor in many ways.
Yeah.
But I think what the Church in Our Culture Network, which is an American expression, they were interested in Newbigin's kind of challenge, but they introduced us into the idea of how does this impact the church. And I would say here is that it seems to me that they weren't able to address the ecclesiology, even though they wanted to.
Good.
So that, I think, is where it fundamentally failed, is they were unable to create forms that were consistent with mission. And so, whether it be Presbyterianism or Anglicanism or whatever it was, fundamentally, the forms were pretty much non-missional and basically deeply entrenched. It failed to address the forms and reform the church. And I think that was a problem.